The whole world watched Muhammad Ali raise his fists in triumph. But there was one man who watched the same footage and wanted to put his own fist through the television screen. His name was Earl Hutchins, and for 31 years he hated Muhammad Ali with a purity most men reserve for love. He wasn't a boxer. He never met the champion. He never stood in a ring or a prison yard or a diner. He was just a soldier, a father, a man who believed, down to the marrow of his bones, that Muhammad Ali was a coward who let better men die in his place. He was wrong. But it would take a coffin to teach him that. It was 1967, and America was tearing itself in half. In the jungles of Vietnam, boys were dying in mud they couldn't pronounce. And back home, on the television screens of a frightened nation, a boxer stood up and said the word that would define a generation. No. He would not go. He would not fight. He would not put on the uniform. "I ain't got no quarrel with 'em, Viet Cong," Ali said. And Earl Hutchins, 24 years old, sitting in a tiny apartment in Bakersfield with his boots by the door and his orders in his hand. Earl heard those words and felt something curdle inside him. Because Earl was going in 3 weeks. He had a wife, a newborn son named Danny, a life he didn't want to leave, and nobody was building statues for him. He didn't have a choice. He didn't have a platform. He didn't have a title to lose. He just had a rifle, a duffel bag, and a one-way ticket to the other side of the world. And on his television, a millionaire in gloves was telling America that the war Earl was about to bleed in wasn't worth fighting. Easy for him, Earl thought. Easy for the man they'll never send. That was the day the hatred was born. Earl came home from Vietnam in 1969. Not all of him. He left something in that jungle he could never name. He came back with a limp, a tremor in his left hand, and a silence that swallowed dinner tables whole. And while Earl was over there, dragging his best friend's body through a rice paddy, holding him as the light went out of his eyes, Muhammad Ali was giving speeches on college campuses, getting applause, becoming a hero. While Earl's friends came home in boxes, the man who refused to go became a legend. Earl couldn't forgive it. He wouldn't. He wrote letters he never sent. Ugly ones. Threats, some of them. He'd start them in the dark after the nightmares woke him, his tremoring hand barely able to hold the pen. "You are a coward. My friends died and you got famous. I hope you rot." He never mailed a single one. But he kept them, in a shoebox, in the closet, a shrine to a hatred that had become the only thing that made sense of his pain. Because here is the terrible truth about a wounded man. Sometimes the hate is the only thing holding him together. If Ali was a coward, then Earl's suffering had meaning. Then the boys who died had died for something, and the man who dodged it was the villain. Take away the villain, and Earl would have to look at the war itself, at the waste, at the boys buried for a lie. And that was a truth Earl Hutchins could not survive. So he chose the hate every day. For 31 years. The years took their toll on both men. By 1996, the whole world watched a trembling, silenced Muhammad Ali light the Olympic flame in Atlanta. Parkinson's had stolen his lightning. His hands shook. His voice was gone. Earl watched that too. And for one flickering, shameful second, he felt something that wasn't hate. He saw the tremor in Ali's hand, and Earl looked down at his own left hand, the one that had shaken since Vietnam. The same tremor. Two broken men, a continent apart, shaking with the same ghost. Earl turned off the television. He wasn't ready. Not yet. Some truths you have to be broken open to receive. Earl's breaking was coming. The call came on a Tuesday in the spring of 1998. His son, Danny. The newborn Earl had left to go to war, now a grown man. A soldier, just like his father. Because that's how it goes in families like Earl's. The uniform gets passed down like an heirloom. Danny was gone, killed in a training accident overseas. A war that wasn't even a real war, a death for nothing. And Earl Hutchins, the man who had spent 31 years believing every soldier's death had meaning, stood over his own son's flag-draped coffin and felt the entire architecture of his life collapse. Because now he understood. There was no glory in it. There was no meaning in the mud. His son had not died a hero. His son had simply died, young, afraid, 10,000 miles from the boy who loved him. And in that shattering, unbearable moment, standing at a graveside with rain soaking through his good black suit, Earl Hutchins finally understood a sentence he had hated for 3 decades. I ain't got no quarrel with 'em Viet Cong. Ali hadn't been a coward. Ali had been the only one brave enough to ask why. Ali had looked at the machine that fed boys like Danny into the dark, and he had said no, and he had paid for that word with his title, his freedom, and the prime of his career. Earl had called that cowardice. But standing over his son, Earl finally saw it for what it was. It was the bravest thing a man could do, to refuse. To stand alone against the whole roaring nation and say, "These boys are worth more than your war." The boys Earl had buried. The son he was burying now. Ali had tried to save them all, and Earl had hated him for it. Earl Hutchins went home from his son's funeral and took down the shoebox. 31 years of hate. Letters full of poison, written in a shaking hand. He read every one. Then he burned them, one by one, in the kitchen sink, and he watched 3 decades of misplaced rage curl into ash and smoke. And then, with the same trembling left hand, Earl Hutchins wrote one final letter. "Mr. Ali, you don't know me. You will never know what you meant to my life, because for most of it, what you meant was hate. I was a soldier. I went where you refused to go. And I hated you for staying home. I hated you while my friends died. I hated you for 31 years. Last week I buried my son. He wore the same uniform I did. He died for the same nothing I almost died for. And standing over his grave, I finally heard you. You weren't running from the war. You were the only one with the courage to tell the truth about it. You tried to save boys like my son, and I spent my life calling you a coward for it. I was the coward. I was too afraid to question a war that took everything from me. You were not. I am sorry. I forgive you for nothing, because there was nothing to forgive. Instead, I am asking you, a dying old man to another, to forgive me. Your enemy for far too long. Your brother at last, Earl." We don't know if Muhammad Ali ever read that letter. By 1998, the champion could barely speak. Thousands of letters poured into his home. Most were never answered. Most were never read. But that was never really the point, because the letter wasn't written to change Muhammad Ali. It was written to free Earl Hutchins. For 31 years, Earl had carried his hatred like a rifle he could never set down. And the tragedy, the devastating tragedy, is that Ali never even knew Earl existed. Ali wasn't the prisoner. Earl was. We think hate is something we do to other people, but hate is a cell we build around ourselves, and then we throw away the key, and we call the prison justice. Muhammad Ali stood alone against an entire country, and refused to hate the men on the other side of the world. And it took Earl Hutchins 31 years, a war, and a coffin to learn the same lesson from the man he'd spent his life despising. That's the story history never tells. Not the punches, not the belts, not the roar of the crowd in Zaire, but a broken soldier in Bakersfield burning his hatred in a kitchen sink, finally understanding that the man he'd called a coward had been the bravest of them all. Ali fought Liston. He fought Frazier. He fought Foreman. But the fight that mattered most, he never even knew he'd won. The day a man who'd hated him for 31 years finally laid down his fists. The champion never threw a punch. And he saved a man anyway.